From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good evening. I'm Anne McLean from the library's music division, and it's my pleasure to welcome composer Gabriela Lena Frank to the Library of Congress tonight, and also Harry Christophers, who's the artistic director of the Handel and Haydn Society. Very, very excited to have you both with us. Thank you for coming. This is a very special concert tonight, featuring the famous Handel and Haydn Society and also a new work co-commissioned by the Society and the Library of Congress. We've been looking forward to this for quite a while. The work was co-commissioned by these two institutions to mark our milestone anniversaries, our 90th as a concert presenter since 1925, and H&H, the nation's oldest continuously performing arts organization, is celebrating its bicentennial. This is the Washington premiere, and it was heard for the very first time last June in Boston by a very chorus-centric audience at the Chorus America conference. What was that evening like for you?
Oh, it was brilliant. I mean, H&H, we hosted Chorus America in Boston and performed in Symphony Hall. A very mixed program of some Handel. I think we did some Messiah, I believe, and Gabriela's wonderful piece, and we also did some Arvo Pärt, and it was a mixture, particularly devised for Chorus America and all the delegates and choral conductors and singers there.
You know, we were looking, I was showing them just now, we have a book, we have a complete run of all the books of choral or pieces collected by the Society, and it began in 1815, right?
Yes, the Society gave its first concert on Christmas Day, 1815, in King's Chapel in Boston, in which there were pieces by Handel and Haydn, of course. Handel, and why it was called that was because Handel was the old and Haydn was the new. Haydn only died within a few years, so it's very simple. But what's interesting about these pieces, and this, we talk about this volume, what people don't know is that H&H was a publishing company, and in 1825, 1827, 1830, they published various things. And one of these is called the Old Colony Collection, and I was fascinated by it because I had, with my group I founded in England 16 years and years ago, we recorded the complete Eton Choir book, which dates from, of course, 1490, a few years before. But this, you know, for a young country, this is quite a publication. And it contains choruses from, a lot of Handel choruses from Messiah, Israel in Egypt, Judas Maccabeus, Joshua, but then a whole lot of what I can term sort of late sort of chapel royal verse anthems by very well-known composers called Kent and Chappell. Does anybody know them? No. Well, nor does anybody in England either. But what was amazing is that these people were clearly, they were the Bairstows, the Howells of the choral world in 1780, between about 1780 and 1800. So, and there's a piece by Kent we're performing this evening, Hear My Prayer, that was actually very, very popular at that time. Nobody possesses it today in England. There's no cathedral choir that has it in their library. But it was last published in a collection for Durham Cathedral in about 1843, but not performed. But here they are, preserved in the Old Colony Collection here. So you'll witness one or two of those pieces. And also you'll recognize there's a piece by a person called Mozart. Two sacred words, and no prizes, I'm afraid, for guessing where the tune comes from. But you'll hear it tonight.
You know, you'll have to go backstage in a moment, so we'll start with you and ask you a couple of questions. With your own ensemble, the 16, which Harry founded and has an extraordinary reputation around the world, you achieved such an expressive simplicity. And I saw a statement from you somewhere where you said, quote, "We shape the phrases according to the architecture of the time, allowing the music to have the freedom that it did then." This applies so beautifully to this program, all the programs you're doing, new work, old work.
Well, I mean, so much of the work I do in England is in Renaissance music, and of course that sacred music, the composers of the day wrote the music with the buildings in mind, just the same as the builders of those wonderful cathedrals all throughout Europe built the cathedrals with the music in mind. There was definite ratios that were going on. And so, to fit that is lovely. And when we talk about architecture, I mean, architecture and music, the whole idea of the arch of a phrase goes right through from Renaissance days, through Baroque, right through to early classical, and really, I suppose only with Beethoven, etc., things begin to change. But really, we can use that idea of architecture and shape of phrases right through, certainly into early Mozart and Haydn.
It's wonderful to have Gabriela's piece on this program. We are pleased to have been working with Ira Pedlican and with the Handel and Haydn Society for 2 years, in the past 2 years, to make this possible, and have had a number, of course, discussions about it. It's string quintet and full chorus of 26, right? And tell us about the text. We were talking about this earlier, Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Well, it was interesting, wasn't it? Because we having a commission, we bicentennial, we really pondered a lot about what to do with the text, and I said it's got to be something that was really relative to Boston. And somebody said, well, there's this amazing thing called the Boston Hymn. I'd never heard of it. It's incredibly long, isn't it? I mean, it's by Emerson, and what was it? It's about 3 pages long.
Something like that. And I remember in our initial discussion that I had already a very good team on board. The very first conversation, I was pulling it up on the internet in that conversation that we had over the phone. There were several of us sharing that, and I remember looking at it going, oh my God, and they only want this to be 15, 18 minutes, and I said, this is plus, possible instrumental interludes. We were already tossing out a wish list of attributes that could go into the music. So I remember thinking, okay, I'm an editor's daughter, so I should be able to get into this text and be able to pull out salient elements. But doing just a simple surgical excerpting wasn't going to really do well, because the text, if you know it, is very linear. So if you actually just remove a verse, it suddenly doesn't make sense. So what you need to do is go to each one and distill it down a little bit more, and then it actually makes sense if you get rid of some of the details that trip you up and just get it down to the bare bones. And then it's also a bit of a sermon. Now, sermons don't necessarily lend themselves well to song, but lyrics do. So was there a type of lyricized sermon that I can make? So I preserve that sense of foretelling the future when you get away from tyranny. I mean, it was very, very important to keep that sense of grandeur and that sense of awareness of the path that Emerson had, but also the optimism that he had for the future. So we worked out something where I was able to distill the text down, and then to give a very prominent role, you'll see, to the instrumentalists. They tell the story, I think, equal to the singers.
Yes, and you've actually, what Gabriela's done is she's achieved a wonderfully, I mean, to say it's an archaic sound with the singers, it isn't quite, it sounds very colonial. It really does capture, I just feel, as soon as the singers come in, it captures something about the early 1800s, and it's amazing. And you get in the salient bits, the no kings and all that sort of stuff, yes, which is good.
And about the text itself, it's very compelling. It refers to slavery, and that, of course, is a very important issue of the day, of Emerson's day. What were the phrases? I want to ask you about the recitative-like quality. Somebody had noticed that there are certain moments that have that quality, and the diction is incredible. I heard the recording of the premiere. Well, that's what you're known for. That's what, among other things, that's what the society is known for, is carrying the word so beautifully. Are you thinking of recording it, perhaps, at some point?
I don't know. We'll have to see if it's in the future. I think it's interesting. Something you mentioned just about the words. I mean, the fact that this text, of course, is so powerful and so powerful to America. And one of the things with this concert is just after Gabriela's piece, we have pieces by William Byrd, which, of course, are incredibly powerful to. It's from the era of post-Reformation in England, when Catholics lived in fear of their life, and you'll see that actually there's a marvelous elegy to Thomas Tallis by William Byrd, but then I've also, for the Agnus Dei, you'll notice I will have 4 singers just at the side of the stage singing this in a very intimate way, because Byrd wrote those masses for private use. They weren't for singing, well, they weren't allowed to be sung in the big cathedrals because they were in Latin, of course, but they would have been sung in a private house, recusant Catholics getting together, worshipping in private, and if Thomas Cromwell had knocked at the door, their heads would have been cut off. I mean, it's you know, this was powerful stuff. So just in the same way that your piece in the Boston Hymn is very powerful, so we can reflect that way back 400 years to England.
I remember what I wanted to convey too, and it was a real fine line, was I wanted to celebrate and to be glorious when we get to that moment, but to also come to hint at the tyranny that he's referring to. So there is some rather dark writing in it, dark harmonies, and you have to go there as a player. You can't eschew that, and the drama is much higher as a result. It may not be that obvious when you look at the sermon, and it was when I distilled it that I saw these jewels and these lines that were coming out, and I realized this is really high, it's almost operatic. It's just high drama, but he had that kind of feeling. So that raised the bar when I saw that there's a lot of levels to this. So can I come up with music that likewise has those kinds of levels?
I was thinking, you mentioned earlier that the writing for the voices at some point, I saw something reference to low voices and high voices. Would you expound on that a little bit?
Well, for me, a choir is an orchestra. It's not just voices and it's not just register. There's the color blend. We talk about sopranos and we talk about altos, and yes, there's a slight registral difference, but it's the color that's very important. And of course, a woman can sing a note that a man sings the exact same note at the same octave, and it's a completely different color, one that's instantly recognizable by anyone. So the interplay of low and high is an easy way to separate verses. You can just assign now girls, now boys, now boys, now girls. But then you can also blend. So there's an innate kind of drama of teaming up and separating that can be very effective. And Emerson has that too. There are certain lines that are higher drama, other lines that are almost like a Greek chorus. They're commenting. Some lines advance the plot. Others make a metaphorical allusion to something in nature. It's expensive when you make just an allusion to nature to make the lyrics pretty. But if they can also double up and advance the plot at the same time, for me, that's almost like combining high and low voices. So you can see how he's orchestrating with colors and intentions at the same time. So I think that, symphonically when I write for the choir, and some people say I write vocally for the symphony, so I think you find that common ground.
It's interesting because actually also your orchestral writing, the string writing is very, very different, isn't it? And it's very, are there kind of the sort of folk elements that come into it, and where do they come from?
So yes, and if you have read anything in my bio, you will know that I'm not from Boston, and I have Jewish Lithuanian forebears, Chinese forebears, and Peruvian forebears, and then I was born in Berkeley in 1972, and it hit Berkeley, hippie heyday. So I'm very, I represent a lot of Americans my generation. And in my life, as I have studied música andina, Andean music of Bolivia, Ecuador, Peru, and looking at the colonial music too that has come over, I've also made a study very casually, of folk music of the world and of other cultures. And there's certain gestures that just seem to be of the people that come up. There's a kind of lift, there's a kind of grace note phrasing that just seem to lend themselves well to flutes. And we have flutes everywhere. And this is a very general observation. And so even when people listen to music of mine that is not Andean, this is not an Andean work, they still see the things that I like to do in my ostensibly Andean influence works. So one of the things I notice in folkloric groups, there are a lot of solos. There's something about the intimacy of the three other players backing off and one player coming to fore, and you have that in this kind of writing. There's something vocal about the line, and you have a lot of that in the string writing, where one player just starts going off, and it's just got this very expressive feeling. For me, that is of the people. There's something very much of the populist mindset, expressing yourself that way. The harmonies, sort of open harmonies. Dissonances are usually inflected. Folkloric music, a lot of people think the harmonies are very simple if you only look at the primary notes of the melodies. But if you look at all the little notes they do getting into the main notes, instead of just going da-da-dum, they might go da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum, da-dum. All the little notes that are characteristic of one region over another, they're often not that consonant. And that's what enriches the music. Actually, for me, it's a bit like seeing a very nice sweater, and it comes with that tag, and saying, the variations in the fabric are not blemishes, is what makes it interesting. Yeah, it's still a sweater, but the so-called blemishes, I think, are the most interesting aspects of folkloric music, and there's plenty of that. I write it out. I don't leave it for the player at their discretion to inflect, as you would with folkloric music. I mean, I'm a bit of a control freak, because I just make sure everything is in there. But you also want to bulletproof the music. If you don't have such skilled players as the H&H musicians, you really need musicians that need everything spelled out so then they can emote and feel comfortable. That's another reason why, if you're making folkloric allusions, you try and use the notational vocabulary of classical music.
Was this your first work for chorus?
This one?
Uh-huh.
Oh, no.
That's what I just wanted.
Oh, no. This one I only earned because I wrote about a dozen or so. I mean, you work your way up. And in fact, your former director heard me speak on a panel at a previous Chorus America conference, and then followed up. So she sounds very interesting. Followed up and listened to choral music. This was a very careful, considered search on their part for something like this. And I have more choral music in my future. I have a requiem that I will be writing for the Houston Symphony and their large choir. And I only have one requiem in me, so I really have to do well with this one. I have an opera coming up, and the opera will also have a chorus. So it's interesting. The choir is very portable. You can take it into many different kinds of environments. It can be a cappella, written for the king singers, so that's one kind, or chanticleer. Children's choirs, very, very different. Then if they are steeped in tradition, as you guys are, but still looking to the future, completely different animal from the opera, or a symphony's own choir. It's not the same as an opera's own choir. And I went to school with singers, so I understand these very strange creatures that we call singers. I understand the culture, and I love it. I love art song too, and sometimes I try and write choral music that sounds like art song, in the tradition of Schubert or Schumann, where you have one singer and one piano, and that's it for the evening. There's something very beautiful about that. I try to bring that into choral writing as well.
I remember that one of your interviews said your piano teacher used to play art songs for you when you were a child, which is sort of unusual to be introduced to them that early. But that inculcates a lot of your writing. And I was thinking, too, about your comments about the opera. I was curious about, I was thinking about this work, this Emerson text and the work that you've just written, which is almost like a sacred work, and thinking about the fact that H&H was formed to perform sacred music, but it has this strong element in it. And I was just thinking about the society, too, and your plans. Do you ever have mixed evenings, as you used to do in the early part of the history, when you would have a Beethoven symphony alongside a piano concerto, and
Oh yes, we do. I mean, the thing is, now it's a period orchestra. So when Christopher Hogwood was made artistic director in the early '80s, and Chris turned a brave move. I mean, very brave move at that time to sort of big transition, change the orchestra into a period orchestra, and which has grown and grown and grown. And it's a very interesting subject, because of course it's changed the so-called mission statement of bringing of being old and new. But in my book, actually, by having period instruments, what we're doing is quite simply making the music of of the past sound new. I mean, it's fascinating hearing a period orchestra play Bach, play Haydn, play Beethoven. You hear things you've never ever heard before. Especially in Baroque music, you hear tone colors of instruments that just don't exist today, and that I think is so wonderfully beautiful. And I'm afraid today I can't hear a modern orchestra play Baroque music. I really can't. It's just not. We've learned so much. I mean, the thing is, when the period music movement started, and indeed when Chris Hogwood formed his own group in England, Academy of Ancient Music, all those years ago in the sort of very early 70s, I remember, because actually I sang at Westminster, after I left Oxford, I sang at Westminster Abbey for 6 years. I sang professionally for 6 years before I gave up singing. I didn't want to sing anymore. But I sang in Chris Hogwood's very first creation, and I remember, oh my goodness, the orchestral playing was, well, it was not brilliant. Because these people were, these players were sort of learning on the job. They were learning all about these wonderful instruments. They were trying to get sounds out of an oboe, an early clarinet. And the horns were, it was just, it was cacophony really. But bit by bit, these players now, and the standard at the Juilliard movement in the Juilliard program in New York, it's staggering. We're getting fantastic players coming through that are really good in their own right, and it's very exciting. It's very exciting times, and I think the result is that period music, it's really coming alive. And when you, I think, if ever you get the chance to come to Boston and hear H&H live in Symphony Hall, it's an experience. The vitality and physicality that's being produced by the music making, and not only that, it's the communication. These players and singers, they love what they do. They know so much about their instruments and what they're singing about and the text. And I'm very text driven. I'm not interested in a choir making a beautiful sound and doing the breaths and singing perfectly in tune, and the words are sort of an accompaniment, sort of syllables or an appendage to the note on the page. It's not about that. It's about, anybody writes for the voice. You're writing text all the time. The text has to live. And in my book, I mean, they get very bored by me saying to them, look, you just go back to Monteverdi. He said, sing as you speak. And that's the simple dictum that you can use for everything. And the music will come alive and it won't be false. That's what I think anyway.
Such a rich history, and it's so exciting to see how you do this very old music you're speaking about with new composers too, and that's pretty amazing for us to contemplate. And I was reading about commission that the society tried to commission Beethoven, and that was kind of fascinating. And I looked up a bit here and there about it, but he wasn't able to accept it. But just the fact that you went after him, as they say,
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the society, you look back over the history, the H&H premiered not only Messiah, Haydn's Creation, Bach's Matthew Passion,
Exactly.
Verdi Requiem. Boy, I'm not going to do that, don't worry, I'm not going to play that on periodisms just yet. But anyway, it's an immense legacy to this country, and it's fascinating. And what was the lovely thing in the bicentennial is that we were revisiting pieces that we hadn't done for years. I did a performance of Handel's Jephthah, which H&H last performed, I think, in 1858 or something. It was amazing.
Amazing. What now that you've come through this extraordinary celebration period, do you have a new trajectory for the next few years? As you've really guided this whole bicentennial.
Yes, I mean, in many ways it's more of the same. I mean, my great love is Handel, so every season we will close with a Handel oratorio. This year we're closing with Handel's Saul, his first oratorio, and which is immense. It's a phenomenal piece. Next year we'll do Semele and Hercules, the two secular, the two oratorios that were a disaster in his lifetime, because God forbid you couldn't have, the word oratorio had to be sacred, and the profanity of something like a story of sex and lust, as in Semele, was not for the audiences of those days. But it's a brilliant piece. And we'll carry on to do, I'm planning to do Theodora and Susanna. They're wonderful music. Handel, he just has this incredible insight into characters and all those amazing Old Testament stories, which he just brings to life. And we now see so many of them being done on the operatic stage, which I think is brilliant. And we get some, we only look back to Theodora and Peter Sellers' amazing production that's sort of set Handel alight, really. So yes, I mean, it's sort of continuing the same. We've got a big accent on Haydn symphonies. Haydn, for me, is just a phenomenal symphonic writer. And I can't remember which. I think it was Kurt Masur or somebody said. Somebody asked him, "Why do you never perform Haydn?" He said, "It's too difficult for modern orchestras." It is difficult, and and he has this sort of. You look him up in a textbook, and he has this adage, the grandfather of the symphony, and it sort of makes people think, "Oh, he must be a bit boring," but he's not. He's full of wit, emotion, drama, charm. I just say to the players every time, Haydn, every day he went for a walk and he took a notebook with him and he wrote down in that notebook things about the colors of the leaves, what animals he saw, what he was feeling like, what the color of the sky was, and all his symphonies, his creation, everything he wrote, it's all pictorial. And you just have to have imagery behind you and think up ideas the whole time.
I didn't know about these notebooks. That's fascinating. It's like Goethe's album leaves,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And say a bit more about those.
Well, I mean, it's Arnoncourt, of course, did a lot of research, and Arnoncourt's, of course, recordings of Haydn are just second to none. They are wonderful. What he gets out of the composer. I think what it just gives us an insight into what Haydn was thinking the whole time, and we don't. There's a tendency. There's been a tendency with period music and the whole historically and performance to get bogged down in academia, and that to sort of rather overload our performance of it. And so that's why when I'm rehearsing Haydn, I invent ideas and just imagery. It may not be what Haydn was thinking, but it might have been. But I'm sure Haydn would be pleased that actually we're doing that and we're thinking about how to interpret this particular phrase. And everything's important, just some things are more important than others. And we go into a lot of detail, and hopefully then it will come to life on stage.
And it's fascinating what you say about the natural world being such an influence on him. Does this also play a role in your work? And also I wanted to ask you too about, I read somewhere that you have a practice of waking up and warming up as a composer.
Yeah, actually. I'm also a pianist, although I didn't get any degrees as a pianist in school. I was lucky enough to attract the attention of very, very good teachers, and I played a lot. And one of my old schoolmates here, Wendy Olson's in the audience, is somebody I accompanied her in playing all the works of Bartok for violin and piano for her doctoral recital. So I was very active in that way. And in doing so, I picked up some really good habits as a pianist that also work for composing. So performers do exercises, they do scales, they do arpeggios, but they don't perform those scales and arpeggios for you. You wouldn't pay money in a concert to go listen to them go up and down on this. But the scales and arpeggios, the idea is that they're embedded in everything they do. And even the practice is not just technical. Musicalizing your scales and making very musical your arpeggios is a very good one for performers. In most compositional training programs, we don't come up with the analogy of this, and I started doing this really on my own, coming up with exercises that I can do as a composer. So, for instance, something that's embedded in every piece are transitions. And transitions are notoriously difficult for especially younger, inexperienced composers to master. How do you get from something that's really high drama, and then ka-lunk, you're in the soft section, and then ka-lunk, and you're just high drama all over again. And some composers are difficult because they don't give you much transition time, maybe 2 measures to try to smooth everything out. You can see the performers putting the brakes on. It's a bit like a plane trying to take off with only a little bit of land to run from. And if the composer is very esteemed, we just accept it. But so you can practice transitions. And something I do often is I will take something like perhaps 8 bars of the Handel Messiah, and then I will take 8 bars of Mahler 6, and I have to join them. And it is great fun because you're working with fabulous material, first of all. And you're getting in there, and you really understand something about Handel when you see he could have done this, but he went here instead. You're inside the forest rather than just looking from the outside, and you're touching the trees, and you're getting in there. Or you could do something like Shostakovich, and take a string quartet and go to Bartok, and another quartet. So now the instrumentation is the same. You have to get into it in a different way. It's not just bleeding in the instruments smoothly. It's actually understanding what makes this Russian, what makes this Hungarian, what makes this 2 different gentlemen. So because that situation, the Handel, the Mahler, the Shostakovich, and Bartok, is going to come up in my own music, the parallel. And when it does, I'm ready. In fact, I'm filled with ideas. So often I'm asked, how long did it take you to write something? And that's a hard question for me to answer, because when I sit down and I assemble all the transitions I played around with over the years, because I keep everything in my binders in my studio, and I have maybe 40, 50 binders, of just material that has surfaced over the years. It's all inflammable. I mean, creativity went into that, so it doesn't take me long to take something and get started, but it took time. So assembling everything together, writing new music, hiding my track so you wouldn't be able to connect it to the notes, and really coming out with something that doesn't sound like Frankenstein may only take a month to 6 weeks, but it doesn't take into account all the time I put into each and every little bit that winds up in that binder. So the exercises are a really good way to keep you in shape. I can't imagine a performer not staying in shape and trying to learn from ground zero each and every work. It'd be
like your long
impossible.
tones and your scales
Yeah.
and all the things that you have. You've said that composers are storytellers, and this, of course, applies to all the composers that you are performing with the society and all composers today. And you've talked about, I love this phrase, you said composers are storytellers uniting a lot of different things, coding it in music in order to give our impressions of the world. I'm just thinking, there's so much to be said. I want the audience to have a chance to ask you both some questions. We talked, I want to mention one or two other things. One was that the Society commissioned Amy Beach, and we own 300 of her works here, so that's an interesting thing for us. And that she was only 22 when she wrote the Mass that the Society premiered. And it was very seldom done after that, but she also had a symphony performed by the Boston Symphony Orchestra. So I wanted to just ask you to touch on the issue, this reminded me, to touch on the issue of diversity and inclusion of composers, broadening the canon of composers, and by this gesture, this is a wonderful thing to have this commission out in the world for a major choral society like this. What is your thinking today on how to mentor this, and how also for you, how to open this up? How do you open this dialogue?
This is we could talk about this, in a seminar over a week about how to address the issue of diversity in the arts. I have thought of myself primarily as a one-woman show, as a freelancer. I don't have a nonprofit organization. I haven't worked in the public schools where we are bereft of our arts programs in a way that we weren't before. In many ways, I'm kind of a plug-in, where I go in and I do what I can. And when I get invited, like to work with you, that is one statement. If I'm invited to work with the Sphinx organization, the founder, Aaron Dworkin, won a MacArthur Genius Grant. He was actually a schoolmate of mine at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. He was a young multiracial African-American violinist already going after a repertoire by African-American composers. I remember myself looking at the repertoire thinking there wasn't enough that reflected my kind of history, and I had to do something about it. So it set the bar high. I started to see myself in a way that really put me as needed by the world, but needed in a high quality way. I really had to pay my dues. I had to be great at what I did. I couldn't just be a messenger. So now I have found a lot of, as I'm getting older, I turned 44 this year, I am old enough when I go into the colleges that I could be their parent, and they look at me as a role model. And I can see their eyes get big. I just left DePaul University a week there, and the women composers, and actually the men composers too, they can welcome diversity as well. This is something that's an issue for all of us. So it just means I can't walk away. I have to keep going. There aren't very many women composers yet. It's much better. This is a similar issue for women conductors as well. I actually think they are a little bit behind the composing, maybe because it's more public. Most composers were away, and then for events like this, we come out of the closet and we actually there's a face to us. But it comes about through the efforts, singular as well as an aggregate, of what we can do collectively. I mean, you guys heard me on a panel, and I was kind of an out-of-a-box selection for this great honor, this great commission, but it takes an endorsement like this is very powerful. It's very powerful.
Yes, I think it's very interesting because I mean, one of the reasons Gabriela came out of that box, because actually we found your music challenging, which I certainly for vocal music, I find, I'm going to be a bit bold statement here, but I find a lot of choral music that's written today is it's just not challenging enough. People are falling into the sort of mold of wanting something that's beautiful, sustained, is going to be, they can meditate to, or it's going to be ethereal, and it's just well, to me it's wallpaper music, and I want something that's challenging. I'm not going to name any of those composers, but for me, I mean, in England, there's he's a Scottish composer who I have immense respect for, James Macmillan. He wrote a big Luke Passion that was co-commissioned between Boston Symphony Orchestra and the London Symphony Orchestra. His music's challenging and it's rewarding. And we need only look back to Britten, Tippett, people like that. Their music was challenging, but there's something rewarding about it. And one can slip into the choral world in particular can slip into something that's just easy, or just makes a pleasant sound. And it's sort of, in a sense, it's the way that I think many choirs operate. They're intent on being beautifully in tune, beautifully together. The breaths have no part of the music, and it's what I call pastel shade music. I want a vibrant oil painting. I don't want any pastel shades. And that's what bless you, Gabriela, because that's what you've given us something that's vibrant that we have to work at. And the reward is great in the end. I mean, it's interesting about composers. I mean, we have in England we have a lot of very fine female composers who are writing in all repertoires. I mean, I can think of Judith Weir, Sally Beamish, straight off, who are writing for all sorts of genres, and it's brilliant. More of it.
More of it.
To have you both here at the same time. I wasn't sure we'd have the pleasure of having you, but this is great. And I wanted to ask if there's anybody who has questions before Harry has to go backstage. Questions for any of you? Nope. I have a question too. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, I'd like to know more about the opera that you're writing and when it's going to be premiered and where.
Well, the past couple weeks, now I can start talking more publicly about it. Operas are very hard to come about. This has been in the works for about 9 years. When I really think about the first, murmurs of something happening, there's a consortium of several opera companies, so then a lot of planets have to be in alignment. They work out who gets to premiere, what singers, their own singers, are they going to share the production design. So to compose the libretto team, we are the smallest part of the equation. Maybe, for posterity, our name is on the score, but wow. So my writer is Nilo Cruz. He has the distinction of being the first Latino to win a Pulitzer for his play in 2002, Anna in the Tropics. And I believe that was the first off-Broadway play to be awarded this. And he's a wonderful, fantastic writer, great imagination. And like me, he has a penchant for imagining a what if for his characters. He may take actual events and they may be the backdrop, but then he paints a different story. So even though he talks a lot about political topics and Cuba, he's Cuban American, that's not what the story is really about. And I sometimes feel like I do the same thing, where there is the influence of my mother's culture, but it's not per se, I'm not trying to make a string quartet sound like a band of zampoña panpipes. I'm trying to infuse the essence and take it into my own way. So our story is we will be revisiting Frida Kahlo y Diego Rivera. But there is an existing opera that tells the arc of her story already. And it's a difficult dramatic arc to make work theatrically. She dies inconveniently and things aren't resolved. So we decided we want to be able to do more with it. And there were sounds that we wanted to go after, fantastical sounds. And we needed to make this story fantastical. So we are welding it with the El Día de los Muertos festival, the Day of the Dead. So we know that Frida died 3 years after Diego. What a lot of people don't know is that Diego accepted Catholicism right at the end of his life. And he was a communist, but he accepted it, fearful that his time was up, and he was calling for Frida. There's a little letter where he says this, and so we said, that's it. So Frida is a spirit in the underworld, and she comes back to reminisce. So this way we can have spirits, we can have the villagers that come in, but we have a third pivotal character, and that is Katrina. She's the sentinela, or the keeper of the spirits. She's a trickster and a prankster, and she gets to decide which of the spirits go back every year. So maybe Antonio this year, the diabetic, you can go back and here's some candy for you. Or this is Celardio, the old man, who broke his neck. Here's your cane. And so it is real, and there's tension between Frida and Katrina, two strong women, and there's a past that is hinted at Katrina. How did she get to be in this position? What is going on here? So she watches as Frida and Diego reminisce, and it is absolutely wonderful, really glorious. So we are looking at the 1819 season, and we have been I've been on my phone a lot, yes, no, with contracts and working out the details of the instrumentations. We believe that Katrina will be a high soprano. We think that Frida will possibly be a mezzo, and we want a high baritone for Diego, because he is a avuncular, so he's got to have some of the lows and that sort of gravitas, but he also is heroic, but we can't just make him a tenor. So we need a high baritone. So that's what the opera is about.
Is it going to be in English or Spanish or Spanglish or both?
It will be Spanish, with the possibility of an English version later. But, English is my first language and Spanish is my second. And I believe that there is a place of imagination I can go to when I go into the Spanish, because it's different. I have to leap for it. And I cut my teeth on very lyrical Spanish, too. Even when I start speaking Spanish, I start getting very musical in the way I speak it as well. And so we always knew we wanted to go into Spanish. The challenge for us is trying to get into a Mexican Spanish that's from their time, as opposed to Mexican Spanish that we hear today. I went to school in Houston, so I know Tejano Spanish very well. It's different. And Nilo's Cuban, and I'm Peruvian, and my mom has still street slang that she uses that people look at me when I bring up, and they have no idea what I'm saying. So we are interested. It's a challenge, you're right. The element of challenge is very important for artists. And so this kind of challenge, especially even the subtle challenge, rather than a really obvious one, are the most difficult to get. Like that high money note, okay, I'll just practice and I'll get it. But something like, what's the difference between Mexican period Spanish from their time as opposed to what I hear today, as opposed to what I know? So we'll be in Spanish.
I wonder how much of a role you have in defining the dramatic content of this, and how do you divide the labor of the storytelling with your librettist?
That's a very good question. So it's different for every composer librettist team, and that holds true not just for operas, but any time you have a new text. So Nilo's contributing some of my text for the Requiem that I mentioned, but not all of it. I love Britain, so for that particular piece, I'm modeling off of the War Requiem, where he has Owen Phillips, plus traditional liturgical text. Owen Phillips being a contemporary poet commenting on World War I believe it is, yeah.
Yes, Wilfred, that's right.
Yeah, sorry, that's right. Thank you. So I'm doing something similar with the Requiem, and Nilo was okay with that. Sometimes writers want to do all of the words, so then you honor that. So that's another level of their ownership of the storytelling. If you have a good relationship, I can go to Nilo and say, well, you know what? I would really love some sort of text that allows me to do something very musical and nerdy, something I've always wanted to do with the choir. I want to do something where I peel away one voice, I replace it with the clarinets, and I'm left with just a high soprano that drops down to the basso profundo. I said, so what could that be? So, okay, well, that would be when the spirits are becoming the villagers, and Frida passes the note to Diego, who feels her pain. And so he comes in. So then I'm part of it. But I understand where the landscape that he painted. Other times, he's been very generous. He said, Gabi, what do you think? Would she be angry here? Or what is your reaction? Or would she, be submissive? Or I'm thinking about making Katrina even sharper. And so then I get to participate. So we began to work out the first act in such a way. And we actually had a residency at a small school in Southern California, Whittier College. And they just paid for us to come there to work with their students and speak in some classes. And we had 2 weeks in which we did nothing but breathe and sleep. And I have a wonderful video of the two of us talking on my iPhone, and Nilo's on my floor in my little kitchenette in my room, and he has down glasses, and he turned upside down water glasses, just normal glasses. He put a napkin on each one, and those were the villagers with the white outfits, the campesinos. And the one that had nothing inside were the spirits, because you can see right through them. And an upside down teacup was Diego. Diego. And then for Frida, he had a little soy sauce bottle, the Kikoman, with the red hat, and it's curvy, like this, and that was Frida. And we were talking through the characters, and he was moving around and brainstorming, figuring it out. Then he went away, and he came back and came up with something marvelous. So I'm in there, but it's Nilo's genius.
Well, I know we have to, maybe just one more, and then we have to let them go.
This question is for Mr. Christopher. Knowing that you're a specialist in many things, but Baroque music, early music, polyphony, it's a kind of a double question. I'm very interested in the music from Latin America, composers like Sumaya, Antonio de Salazar, even the first composer who composed the first opera in America, La Rosa Púrpura, Tomás de Torrejón y Vallejo. Have you been interested in that repertory, first of all? And well, that's my first question. And the second one, do you think, I'm a conductor also, and a choral conductor, orchestral conductor. Do you think we performers should focus on the repertory of our countries? Or, for instance, Jordi Sabal has recorded an amazing amount of Spanish music, and you British interpreters, performers, we should focus on all Handel, those composers, and we should focus on our repertoire.
Well, there's a little, because you're close to it. I think that's, I focused obviously a lot on the English Renaissance because we have access to all those part books and everything in England. But I did, years ago, I did a disc once of music by Padilla, who was the first, who was early, he was Spanish that went to Mexico. But I also remember some years ago doing a tour of Brazil of basically first generation Brazilian composers, Nunes Garcia, and there was a Requiem, which was amazing actually. It was a little bit poor man's Mozart, but actually it was still worthy of doing. But actually since doing that, and this was about 15 years ago, I did that, but since then there's been so much more research. And actually, funny enough, I've been approached by somebody in Brazil to look at what looks really good music. So I'd love to. But there's so much. The thing is, there is so much music about, and we forget how much music is in the libraries of Southern America. The stacks there, just waiting to be researched and worked out. And above all, the problem so often with it is that a lot of people start doing the research, but the editions are bad, and you have to sort of go back to the thing. I remember years ago in Portugal, the wonderful Gulbenkian Foundation, they used to produce these fantastic volumes of Portuguese music by Melgas, Rebelo, Seixas, all sorts of people. But actually, and I've performed a lot of it, but we actually had to have it all re-edited. The volumes looked beautiful, but there were so many errors, the pictures were wrong, etc. And now, I was over in Portugal recently, and the Gulbenkian said, we're now getting all these wonderful editions by people coming, but we've got no money to publish them now. So it's unfortunately, it's the other way around. But yes, but I think since you're on the spot, you are here, to get researching and get an identity is fantastic. So, yeah, let's hear it on CD as well.
Thank you for your question. Thank you so much, Harry Christophers, Gabriela Lena Frank. We're looking forward to the premiere, Washington premiere.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.